Hey everyone, Stephen Hurley from Voice Ed Radio with a special series of conversations for you. This is the Voice Ed Radio Spotlight series where we're highlighting the work, the passion, and the commitment of many of our creators here at Voice Ed Radio. It's a chance for you to hear what they're working on, their plans for the future, and maybe a few surprises along the way. Welcome to the Voice Ed Radio Spotlight on Voice Ed Radio.
That was the sultry sound of Stephen Hurley. And this is episode 10 of Outside the Classroom, and it's my final episode of season 1. I love the fact that with these podcasts, I can arbitrarily decide how long a season is or what a season is. I just think 10 episodes is a pretty good start with, and I will definitely be coming back with a second season sometime, whenever that is. And it's kind of significant that this is the 10th episode because 10 years ago, I met Stephen, and I got to know Stephen, and I got to know his passion for radio. And Canadian educators might be familiar with Stephen as the founder and the creator of Voice Ed Radio. And he does some pretty amazing stuff. So if you have not heard of him, you'll want to check out his work on Voice Ed Radio. Just a plethora of really interesting conversations and music and just radio dedicated to education. And so it's my privilege to be able to sit down and chat with Stephen for a short time. It definitely could have gone on a lot longer, but trying to keep these at whatever a consumable length is. But hopefully we did that, and I learned a lot about Stephen's background, his context, his love for radio. Why he thinks it's such a significant medium, and just grateful to know him and all that he does. So here's my conversation with Stephen Hurley. Well, everyone, this is the season finale of Outside the Classroom, and I've enjoyed my 9 previous conversations with such a variety of educators, and I had a few people that I was thinking about doing my 10th episode with, and then, as it sort of happens for me, names just sort of flood through my network, and it's like, Stephen Hurley? Yes, of course, Stephen Hurley. Stephen, why don't you begin by telling us just sort of the basics of the bio that you want to give, right. And then the second part of that question is, how do you and I know each other? So just all about you, and then maybe a little bit about us.
Okay, the 10 is important in this story. So I am Stephen Hurley, and I am a retired educator from the Toronto area. I taught for the same school district for over 30 years. And I say retired because to me, retirement has turned out to be taking the old rubber off and putting new rubber on the wheels. And so you've got a new way of getting around life. And so within that 35, did I say 35? No, it's 30 years with the Dufferin Peel District School Board, had a chance and loved the opportunity to do all sorts of different things. So I got into the habit of writing my own job descriptions every spring. And for 10 years of that 30 years, I was able to do things that didn't exist before I wrote the job description. And to me, that's what kept me in teaching, the ability to kind of be creative and imaginative and take that to a different level. But I tell people I loved every minute of my teaching career. There were a couple of minutes I didn't love, and that was usually due to a Thursday night pub crawl and trying to get in on Friday morning. But the profession allowed me to grow, to make mistakes, to correct those mistakes every Monday morning, and to go on. And it's interesting because education got into my blood, and when it came time to retire, I had no desire to look away. And so I did some work for the Canadian Education Association, now the EdCan network, and was across Canada a couple of times with them on facilitated consultations, and decided 4.5 years ago, this week actually, to start Voice Ed Radio, which is a combination of my love of radio and the sound of other people's voices, and education. And so we've grown over the past 4.5 years. We met the year before voiceed.ca actually began as a multi-author blog space out there in the ether. And we met at Unplugged in Algonquin Park. And that, I believe that was 10 years ago this summer, 2011.
Yes.
So that's why the 10 is important. So that was a gathering of 40 educators from across the country, and we had to apply to get there. And we had to take a train up from Union Station in Toronto to get there and then walk into the park. But it was a few days of imagining, and you were actually my group leader for that session. And I think it was then that I told my story of my love of radio and how it brought me joy. And that's where this whole thing began at 10 years ago this summer up in Algonquin Park with Dean Sharesky and a number of other people.
Well, and that remains, perhaps, well, not perhaps, but I would say definitively the best professional learning experience that I've had. And there were so many elements about that that I've tried to rethink and recapture in other moments, right? The fact that we were in this really amazing space in nature, and it was called Unplugged because here were, 40 of the most plugged in educators at the time in Canada. Everybody was online and doing all kinds of stuff, and we didn't have any access to that. And so it was just these rich conversations that took place on aeronomic chairs, on a beach, in a canoe, in cabins, over dinner, over beers, it was just so wonderful. And you made quite the impression on me during that time. And I remember writing a blog post about it shortly afterwards, because it was, the way I remember it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you, because you knew you were kind of closer to the end of your career, you begin thinking about this experience you had with radio and sort of your love of it and how you might rekindle this, because it was something that was, it seemed like it had been there for a while. So can you just maybe talk about, where did that come from? Like, what was your, why do you love radio? What's the thing?
I was given by a Roman Catholic priest for Christmas one year. I thought it was a box of chocolates. It was square, rectangular. It was kind of heavy. I thought it was a box of black magic chocolates. And I cut his grass, took care of the rectory, and ended up being organist at the church for about 40 years. But anyways, he gave me a transistor radio. And I remember going around my paper route with this thing plugged in. And it was the first time I became aware of the power and the intimacy of radio. Now we didn't have earbuds. We had those little thin earphones, and you put a single ear and you plug it in. It was AM rock. And I remember listening to it. And that's when I became enamored with radio. And I remember that was the summer that I phoned my very first radio station for the first time to request a song. And I dialed and I dialed and I dialed, and it was a rotary dial. And then it was during that hour of trying to get through that I realized that I could actually just push the button on the telephone, where the just almost like Morse code, and dial the number that way. So I started to do that, Anyways, I finally got through, and I heard my song played on the radio, and it said, "This is magic." And I had a grade 5 teacher that year who put me in front of, we had an open concept classroom. All of a sudden the world changed. We had open concept classrooms, and she gave me a cassette tape recorder and a record player. And she said, just go over there and create something. That was the 60s, right? And that's what I did. And I remember, now my memory says 2 weeks playing with the microphone and the tape recorder. It was probably like 2 days, but I remember that just captured my imagination. And I told my parents, I said, I want to be on the radio. That's what I want to do. And, I tell the story that when I went down to pick up the Ryerson, the radio and television arts program at Ryerson, I was on my way down to pick up the application. They wouldn't let me go because it was a polytechnic institute and their kids were going to go to universities. And so I didn't. I went to study philosophy and theology. I went to a seminary and then went to teachers college. But Dean, as you know, the things that make you happy, the things that bring you joy, always bring you joy. I mean, it never gets out of your system once it's in. So when I was, I did some work at OISE, UT here in Toronto. I was an adjunct professor for 3 years on the pre-service program. And it was during that time that I started to write emails to the program director at the major radio station here in Toronto, AM. It was an AM talk radio station. And I said, you need a show on education. And he refused. He refused for 3 years. And I mean, there were a couple of moments of really tense moments where I actually went over his head to the owner of the station, and the owner said yes, and then it didn't happen. But I was intent. I said, this is what we need. This is what I want to do. I want to do like an education radio. I said, all I need is a half hour. I'll bring my own advertisers. And he says, it doesn't matter. It won't sell. And I said, well, the hell with that. So when I retired, I had already had the voiceed.ca address, and I said, and it was a spur of the moment thing on a cold winter evening. It was in between Christmas and New Year's, and I missed the part, didn't I? I missed the part at Unplugged. You may not even want to get there.
No, I mean, that was, again, I'm building this up in my mind as that was a seminal moment for you. And I don't know if it was. I just remember being part of a conversation. It was that all of a sudden Stephen's like, I've had this thing in my life for all this time, and I don't know how to, I want to do it. I just want to do it.
So that was the magic. We were sitting around the great room at Unplugged, and Julia Forsyth was on one part of the room. In one part of the room, Brian Jackson was in another part of the room, and they had just become part of this thing called DS 106, Digital Storytelling 106, which was a course out of Mary Washington University, and there were a lot of frontline, forward-thinking people involved in that whole thing. And it was a digital storytelling course, but part of that was they had started a internet-based radio station to support some of the creative output for that. And so I told that story in the great room because I think we had to do some writing before we got there. And I shared that story, and Julia and Brian both admitted to looking at each other and saying, we need to tell them about DS 106. So DS 106 radio, I found out about on the Sunday, and I did my first broadcast on DS 106 radio on the Monday I got home because I was so excited, and I spent the whole summer, and it just became a thing. And I said, and that's what years later inspired me to start Voice Ed Radio, is that knowing that technology was there, and that the line between creative professional and audience is suddenly broken. Because we can do this, and we can be both audience and creator. I don't know about professional, but time will tell.
Well, when I think about, like, when you talked about your experience as a grade 5 student, and I think about, how wonderful it is when teachers can create these moments for kids. And, not everything's going to stick, because there's probably another kid in your class that had the same experience. It just wasn't his thing, and there, nothing is for everybody. And the purpose of school isn't to is to create these opportunities for kids to figure out what their thing is. And maybe for some of us it doesn't happen. But that's the beauty of it when it does. And when you introduce a kid to something, like Gary Steger uses the line, I love introducing to kids something that they don't know they already love, right? You didn't know you already loved radio until this priest and teacher gave you an opportunity to love it. But my question is, like, go a little deeper into, like, convince us, I guess. I don't know if the word is convince us, but tell us why. You touched on it a bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, what is the magic here that just appeals to you, that feeds you?
It's seduction. It's seduction. And I remember listening to CHFI radio here in Toronto in high school. And this is where it really started to gel for me. Charlotte Odell ran a syndicated show here in Toronto where she would combine music, popular music, some classical, and poetry and prose. So there'd be spoken word on a theme, and then she would weave in music. It was called Tapestry, and it was so seductive that I slept every night with Charlotte Odell under my pillow. I put my radio under, and that's how I went to sleep. And it was there when I switched over to FM radio that I realized there's something compelling about not just the human voice, but how the voice in a radio speaks just to you. They're not talking AM radio, it's kind of loud and obnoxious sometimes, especially now since most AM stations are talk radio stations. But there's something about that FM experience. It was me and Charlotte, and I really believed that, and I felt that I had a relationship. And I said, I wasn't the most confident kid in social situations. I didn't play sports. I played the piano and I mean, loved that, and still do that. There was something about the dream of radio that said, I can have this relationship with people. And, I've talked since just recently, actually, with Valerie Geller, who is a radio consultant and did FM rock and other stations in New York and California. And she's now consulting. She's coming to Voice Ed Radio to do a workshop with us. And she said, you need to imagine that there's just one person. You're talking to one person, not an audience, one person. And that captures it for me, and still captures it for me. Whether I'm doing a podcast or whether I'm doing a live Saturday night music show, it's one. And usually in internet radio, there is just one person listening.
Yeah. Well, sometimes
if you can get more than a few downloads on your podcast, I mean, you're a star, so you probably get 3 or 4.
That's right. That's probably right.
But you don't do it for that. You do it
for the
one person, right? And
right.
And that's it. And I don't know if that makes sense to
that does.
But
well, and I think about great writers and how great writers make you feel like they're talking to you. Like I hadn't heard anybody put it that way, but I mean, I know what you're saying, because the podcast that I listen to, you feel a connection to those people, and they do make you feel like, whether you're sitting in the living room with them or in there, wherever they are, right, you're with them. And so that was a very eloquent way of describing that, and it helps people, or it helps me, and I think others sort of get what it is. And I think everybody's had that experience. Like, radio is a pretty universal idea, and audio is obviously the human voices, but through this medium has this other ephemeral aspect to it.
And it's interesting with podcasting, and some people will say that, well, that's just like radio, and I thought it was as well at one time, and because Voice Ed Radio has a live radio stream, and we can get go live at any time. But I think what podcasting has done is it has taken the broadcast concept, where it's one to many, and reestablish that one to one, because most people don't listen to podcasts in groups. They don't get together on a Saturday night to listen to a podcast like we used to do on the radio, or our grandparents used to do on the radio. It's usually, between the ears, really close. And, when you talk to podcast producers, the sound engineer types are really intent on getting that good sound between the ears, because they realize that that's what people, that's what, whether people come for that or not, that's the experience, part of that experience. Right.
Yeah. So tell me, what is it that you love about Voice Ed Radio, and is there a story or a moment that really sort of maybe captures, like, that was just such a cool moment? So just in general, what is it about Voice Ed and any particular moment that stands out?
Well, the thing that stands out the most is that when I started Voice Ed Radio, I had no desire to become a podcast network. I mean, there were 2 Canadian podcasts about education in Canada at the time, just 2. We had them both. I mean, Derek Rodenizer, Roland Chidiak, Shane Lawrence from Alberta came on, a little bit later. But I think, to me, the dream was to bring people back to the radio around something that should be important to all of us as Canadians, but I knew it was important to a lot of educators. And so that was the dream. It wasn't about podcasting. It was about that live broadcast experience. It hasn't turned out that way. And I guess that the story of Voice Ed Radio is that we have become a rather large podcast network, but and people don't come to radio to hear something they can get in on demand. But we have had very good success with live broadcasts around things that matter. So Kalinda Klein does a weekly broadcast on, she does an anti-racist educator book study, and she's done 7 in the first season since the pandemic began. And we can have upwards of 500, 600 live listeners, which on internet radio is pretty significant. And then, the doc on Saturday nights, I'll get 12 people, most of them family members listening in. But the real value and the real story for me in Voice Ed Radio is the community that's built around it. There are people here that would not have met each other if it weren't for that experience, that supportive community, not only in starting a podcast or doing a live broadcast, but just in that professional learning journey. So a lot of people have met, through Voice Ed Radio, found each other on Twitter as well. Sometimes it'll happen in the opposite way, but there's a community that is built here that I think is really special, unintended, unintentional, accidental community. And I would not trade that for the world, no matter what happens with Voice Ed. I have some pretty strong friendships that have developed because of it. And I mentioned Derek Rodenizer. Derek Rodenizer, I'd never met face to face. We connected on Voice Ed Radio. He came down in the first year of our existence. He was the first person to stay in the Murphy bed in my newly renovated basement. I'd never met him. My wife said, "Who was coming to stay in our house?" Derek. Well, you know Derek. So it's kind of this really neat connection that's grown up around it. One of the beliefs when I started it was that if we can change the way people talk about education, then that's a good step to changing education. I don't think we've changed education that much. Nothing that's happened here has really rocked that boat. But I think we've changed the way people are talking about education. I've had the opportunity to interview some pretty neat people, and the stories that I point to the most are the people that wouldn't normally have a voice. Teachers who you contact and say, "Why would you want to talk to me?" "I want to talk to you because you're in the classroom and you're living this stuff that we're, talking about at a 30,000 foot level. You're living it every day. I want to talk to you because you're an education worker and you deal with those special education students every day. I want to talk to you because you're the caretaker. And we know that the secretaries and the caretakers in a school are the most important people when you first get there. They keep that place buzzing. So that's cool. And I've had the opportunity to talk to people like David Frum and Bob Ray, and those are cool. One thing I will say is that the conversations that I've had that I anticipated being, the most exciting, vibrant conversations, because the person had some status, not always true. Some of those people that you would pass by in the hallway in a school on your way to see someone else, that turn out to have some pretty interesting things to say. So.
Well, and again, I think kudos to you for your tenacity and staying with it and kind of creating something to really be proud of with Voice Ed Radio. And it's something I think those of us who are aware of it understand that it's been doing some good work. So I commend you on that one. My last question to you, and
last question. That's it.
What's that?
That's it. Your last question.
That's it. Yeah, I'm trying to. My goal is to always try to keep these, like, unlike you, where you have just oodles of time. For whatever reason, I've arbitrarily decided on a 15 to 20 minute window. Okay. I don't know why that is. That's just the way. Maybe for editing purposes, I don't know. But I always ask people, and again, the answer might be nothing, and it's kind of odd in your situation because you're talking about education, you've been an educator, but I always ask people, what is it, or has your passion, in this case, we'll just talk about radio, influenced you as an educator? Now, again, I know, maybe in this case, I want you to maybe go back to when you were in the classroom, when you weren't doing Voice Ed Radio, but you still loved radio. How did your love of radio Maybe, and the answer may be nothing. It didn't translate at all to my educator. They were two separate things. Or maybe it did. That's my question. Did it impact you as an educator?
Yeah, it did. The answer is definitely yes. And I can point to two sort of strands to the yes. And one is the fact that I was able to recognize some of that passion in other kids, and it may not have been radio, but it may have been media in some way. It's easy to pick up. It's easy because they're there with their podcast or media piece at 7:30 in the morning and saying, well, school doesn't start till 9, but I wanted to work on this. I need to get in and work on it. There used to be a time you will remember where kids had to come to school to get the technology they wanted to use. And now they have to get out of school to do that. It's kind of a strange irony. But for me, there were very few schools or classrooms that I was in where I didn't do my best to get a radio station up and running, whether it was just, between a few classrooms at lunchtime or on the PA system. It was always something on my mind. And I knew that I couldn't develop a radio station per se, but it was always something that I wanted to introduce. And now the school that my kids go to up the street contacted me last year and they said, we want to set up, guess what they said? They didn't say a podcasting studio. They wanted to set up a radio station. And I said, I'll be there. I'll be there. And so they did. So I think those two ways, you recognize things, your antenna are up, pardon the pun, in a different way. And then you look for opportunities and I think that's what teaching has been about for me. And I hope it continues to be about this for other people, where it's a place where they can not only bring out the passions in kids, but can live out the passions that they have, whether it's athletics or music or, something that really speaks to their heart. It's got to be, that's a key to the wellness in our schools these days.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. This was a delight to speak with you. And I'm just always excited about the work that you're doing and the contributions you do make to Canadian education and education beyond Canada as well. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking time to share with me. And we hope our paths cross again soon.
Over a nice IPA.
There you go.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks for this.
Thank you.